In a world where our minds are constantly bombarded by comparisons, societal expectations, and never-ending streams of information, it's easy to feel like we're falling behind. That quiet voice inside, the one that tells you that you're not good enough, can be relentless. It whispers, "Why even try?" Over time, it carves a space in your mind, stealing your confidence and making you question whether you're worthy of your ambitions. But what if that voice, instead of being your harshest critic, became your greatest motivator? What if, instead of beating you down, it lifted you up? Imagine having an inner voice that didn't cling to fear, but instead encouraged growth and resilience, guiding you through setbacks like a loyal friend. In the wisdom of Buddhist teachings, we find an approach that reshapes how we confront those self-critical thoughts. Buddhism reminds us that these thoughts are just passing clouds, transient and ever-changing. They are not permanent truths about who we are. This simple yet powerful teaching reveals that our thoughts do not define us unless we allow them to. You see, the negative voice in your head wasn't born out of truth. It was built through years of external experiences, maybe a teacher's harsh critique or a culture that labeled mistakes as failures. Over time, these voices settled in, blending with your inner monologue. But just like clouds floating across the sky, they are temporary, not the sky itself. Imagine the mind as a wide, open sky. There will be storms of doubt and anxiety, moments of sunshine and calm, but none of these states are permanent. You are not the storm, and you are not defined by the clouds that pass by. This understanding becomes the first key to breaking free from the suffocating grip of self-doubt. With awareness, you begin to observe these thoughts as just that, thoughts, not facts. And in doing so, you loosen their power over you. Meditation offers a practical path to this freedom. When you meditate, you aren't trying to silence your mind. Instead, you're learning to sit with it, to notice its patterns without judgment. When self-doubt arises, you acknowledge it, but you don't give it the weight of truth. You recognize it as self-doubt, and you return to the present moment. But awareness alone isn't enough. What sets Buddhism apart is its invitation to meet our self-critical voice with compassion, not with force, but with understanding. Instead of fighting against that voice when it arises, imagine welcoming it like you would a friend who's scared or uncertain. You wouldn't shout at a friend for being afraid of failure. Instead, you'd comfort them, help them explore their fears, and reassure them that they are capable. This is the approach we take with ourselves. We soften the harshness of our inner dialogue and ask questions that shift our perspective. When you catch yourself thinking, "I can't do this," pause and ask, "Is that true? Or is it just a familiar habit of doubt echoing from the past?" If you dig a little deeper, you'll often find that these doubts are just echoes of past experiences, not indicators of your true potential. Reframing these thoughts can be as simple as replacing "I'll never succeed" with "What if I gave this an honest try and learned something valuable in the process?" Or "What can I take away from this experience even if it doesn't go as planned?" Each time you respond to doubt with curiosity rather than criticism, you shift your mind's default response from negativity to possibility. It doesn't happen overnight, but with each small victory, you gather evidence of your resilience. When you face obstacles, applying for a job, starting a new venture, or speaking in front of others, that inner critic often grows louder, warning you of failure or embarrassment. But recognizing its voice doesn't mean obeying it. Acknowledging the fear is not the same as letting it control you. By observing it without letting it dictate your actions, you take back control. Every time you act in defiance of your doubts, you collect proof of your ability to adapt and thrive. And this is the beauty of embracing impermanence. Just as self-critical thoughts fade, So do feelings of anxiety or regret. Regret over a past mistake or fear of a future outcome are only temporary visitors in the mind. When you realize that they are transient, you gain the ability to be fully present in the moment where your power lies. Here, in the present, you can act, learn, and grow without being weighed down by fears of the past or future. As you practice detaching from the permanence of these thoughts, you begin to see life as a flowing stream, where nothing is fixed and everything is constantly evolving. Does this mean you need to silence your inner critic forever? The goal isn't to erase those thoughts, but to change how you relate to them. When you meet your doubts with compassion, their power over you diminishes. They become reminders, not of inadequacy, but of areas that need gentle attention and growth. The critic, when approached wisely, can even offer insights. For instance, if your inner voice tells you you're unprepared, it may be nudging you to study or prepare more for a task. But the key difference is in how you interpret its message. You don't see it as a verdict against your worth, but as constructive feedback that you can use to improve. Through self-inquiry and mindfulness, you develop the ability to discern which messages from your inner critic are useful and which are simply noise. This discernment is crucial. It prevents you from being overwhelmed by negativity and instead empowers you to take what you need and discard the rest. The practice of loving-kindness meditation, repeating affirmations like, "May I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be at peace," can help reinforce this shift. At first, wishing yourself well may feel awkward, especially if you're used to the voice of criticism. But over time, the repetition dissolves the walls of resistance, allowing kindness to take root where doubt once thrived. This isn't a one-time fix, but a process of transformation. Each time you catch a negative thought and replace it with a compassionate response, you are creating new mental pathways. Weeks turn into months, and slowly, the once overpowering voice of self-doubt becomes a faint whisper. Even during stressful times, when doubt resurfaces, you will have the tools to navigate it without being consumed. You'll remember that you are not your doubts, and you are not the story they try to tell. Instead, you are the one observing them, the one capable of changing the narrative. Buddhist wisdom shows us that our minds are not cages, but canvases. By practicing mindfulness and compassion, you reclaim the brush and paint a new picture, one where challenges are opportunities and mistakes are lessons. You learn that doubts, like passing clouds, come and go, but they don't change the vast, open sky of who you are. And in that open space, you find the freedom to embrace life, knowing you are much more than the fleeting thoughts that once held you back. Fear is a natural part of life, and in many ways, it is a teacher. It whispers caution when we step into the unknown, warning us of the risks we might face. But fear, if left unchecked, can grow into a barrier, one that doesn't just warn, but prevents us from taking even the smallest steps toward change. The voice of fear becomes intertwined with self-doubt, and before we know it, it convinces us that failure is inevitable and effort is pointless. But Buddhist teachings offer a different perspective. They suggest that fear, like all emotions, is impermanent and should be observed, not obeyed. When fear arises, it's tempting to push it away or pretend it doesn't exist. But suppression often makes it stronger, lurking beneath the surface and manifesting in unexpected ways. Instead, acknowledging fear is the first step to disarming it. When you feel it tighten your chest or churn your stomach, pause and simply recognize its presence. You might say to yourself, "I feel fear, and that's okay." This simple act of acknowledgement removes some of fear's power. It's like turning on the lights in a dark room. Suddenly the shadows don't seem so threatening. With awareness, you begin to ask yourself, what is this fear trying to tell me? Is it protecting me from real danger? Or is it just a remnant of past experiences where things didn't go as planned? Often, you'll find that fear is not based on present reality, but on old memories. By identifying its source, you can respond with greater clarity. If it's warning you about something legitimate, like being unprepared, you can take constructive action. But if it's rooted in baseless doubts, you can gently set it aside and move forward. One of the most effective ways to break fear's hold is through small, consistent actions. When faced with something daunting, like speaking in public or starting a new project, the mind tends to jump to worst-case scenarios. But instead of fixating on what could go wrong, start with something manageable. If public speaking terrifies you, begin by speaking in front of a small, supportive group. If launching a project feels overwhelming, break it down into smaller, achievable steps. Each action, no matter how small, builds evidence that fear doesn't have the final say. Over time, these small wins accumulate, creating a sense of resilience. Resilience, in itself, is a lesson rooted in Buddhism. It's the ability to bend without breaking, to face difficulties without being consumed by them. But resilience doesn't mean fear will disappear. It means you learn to act despite it. Every time you take a step forward, even when fear clings to you, you weaken its grip. You prove to yourself that fear is not an immovable wall, but a temporary challenge you can navigate. And with each step, the voice of doubt grows quieter, replaced by the memory of past successes. Mindfulness is a powerful ally in this process. When you feel fear creeping in, grounding yourself in the present moment can prevent you from spiraling into anxiety. Often, fear is fueled by thoughts of the future. What if I fail? What if they reject me? What if I'm not good enough? These thoughts pull you out of the present and into a hypothetical future where everything has already gone wrong. But mindfulness brings you back to what is happening right now. It reminds you that in this moment, you are okay. You are breathing, thinking, and capable of making a choice. A practical way to practice this is through mindful breathing. When fear arises, take a deep breath in and slowly exhale. As you inhale, acknowledge the fear. I see you. As you exhale, imagine letting go of its weight. This simple practice keeps you grounded, preventing your mind from wandering too far into hypothetical scenarios. You create a space between the feeling of fear and your reaction to it, giving yourself room to choose how to respond. One of the most liberating aspects of Buddhist teachings is the concept that failure is not a sign of inadequacy, but an opportunity for growth. When you treat mistakes as lessons, fear of failure begins to lose its sting. Instead of seeing a failed attempt as proof that you aren't good enough, you begin to see it as information, an experience that can guide you toward improvement. Failure, then, is no longer something to avoid at all costs, but something to embrace as part of the learning process. Consider a child learning to walk. They stumble countless times before they find their balance, but they don't internalize those stumbles as failures. They get up, try again, and eventually take their first steps. As adults, we often forget this natural process of trial and error. We expect perfection from the start and punish ourselves for any misstep. But if we can adopt the mindset of that child, viewing each stumble as part of the journey, fear of failure no longer paralyzes us. It becomes a stepping stone, not a barrier. To complement this mindset, self-compassion is essential. Fear often triggers our harshest inner critic, the voice that says, "See, you failed again. Why do you even try?" But Buddhism teaches that we should treat ourselves with the same kindness we would extend to a friend. If a friend came to you feeling defeated after a setback, you wouldn't berate them or tell them to give up. You would offer words of encouragement, reminding them that everyone makes mistakes and that growth takes time. We must learn to do the same for ourselves. When you catch your inner critic being harsh, pause and ask yourself, would I say this to someone I care about? If the answer is no, then it's time to change the narrative. Replace the harsh words with compassionate ones. Instead of saying, I always mess up, try, I'm learning, and that's okay. Instead of, I'll never get it right, try, each attempt brings me closer to where I want to be. This shift in internal dialogue doesn't happen instantly, but with practice, it becomes second nature. And as you cultivate self-compassion, you begin to view fear as less of an enemy and more of a companion on the journey. You understand that fear is simply a signal that you're stepping outside of your comfort zone, which is exactly where growth occurs. One final aspect to consider is your deeper motivation. Fear often thrives when we lose sight of why we're doing something in the first place. When doubt creeps in, reconnect with your purpose. What is it that drives you? What goal, dream, or value are you pursuing that makes facing this fear worthwhile? By shifting your focus from the fear itself to the reason behind your actions, you reignite your motivation. Suddenly, the discomfort of fear seems small compared to the importance of your purpose. Every time you act despite fear, you rewrite the narrative in your mind. You prove to yourself that fear doesn't dictate your life. You do. And with each act of courage, you build a reservoir of strength. Over time, the challenges that once seemed insurmountable become manageable. You realize that fear is not a stop sign, but a guidepost, pointing you toward the areas where you have the greatest potential for growth. Fear will always be a part of life, but it doesn't have to control you. By observing it, understanding it, and acting in spite of it, you reclaim your power. You learn that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward anyway. And in that decision, you find a freedom that self-doubt could never offer. You find the strength to face whatever lies ahead, knowing that within you lies the ability to overcome, learn, and grow. Comparison is a thief of joy, and yet it is something we all do. We see others who appear to be more successful, more accomplished, or happier, and that tiny voice inside us starts whispering that we're not enough. We look at their achievements and measure our worth against theirs, as if their success diminishes our potential. But comparison is an illusion, a mirage that distorts reality. Buddhist wisdom teaches us that each of us walks a unique path. No two people have the same journey, the same lessons, or the same timing, and recognizing this can free us from the burden of comparison. Imagine a seed buried in the soil. At first, it's hidden, its growth unseen. Over time, it slowly begins to sprout, reaching toward the surface. Next to it, a tall tree already stands, fully grown, its branches stretching wide. It would be unfair for the seed to compare itself to the tree, just as it would be unwise for the tree to forget that it too was once a seed. They each have their own journey, their own timing, and their own purpose. The same is true for us. Some of us are just beginning to sprout, while others may be blooming, but neither stage is more valuable than the other. When you compare yourself to others, you ignore the beauty of your own growth. You may be in a season of planting, where the fruits of your efforts are not yet visible, or you may be in a season of rest, regathering your energy for what's next. The key is understanding that your growth is valid, no matter the pace. Just because someone else's tree is already towering doesn't mean yours won't bloom in time. When you honor your own process, you release the pressure to conform to timelines that were never meant for you. The habit of comparison often stems from the highlight reels we see around us, especially in today's digital world. Social media offers curated glimpses into people's lives, their achievements, vacations, promotions, and joyful moments. But what we don't see are the struggles behind those smiles, the late nights filled with doubt, the moments of failure they rarely share. It's like watching the final scene of a movie without seeing the hours of effort it took to get there. And when you compare your behind-the-scenes struggles to someone else's polished highlight reel, you set yourself up for disappointment. Buddhism encourages us to look beyond appearances and recognize the interconnectedness of all experiences. Everyone, no matter how successful they seem, faces challenges. The friend who seems to have it all together may be dealing with inner battles you can't see. The co-worker who just got promoted may have faced countless rejections before reaching this point. Understanding this complexity allows us to soften our judgments, both of others and of ourselves. We realize that life isn't a race to see who can reach the top first, but a personal journey shaped by growth, setbacks, and persistence. One way to break free from the comparison trap is to redirect your attention inward. Instead of focusing on what others have achieved, ask yourself what progress you've made, no matter how small. What have you learned in the past year? What personal milestones have you reached? By shifting the focus from external validation to internal reflection, you begin to appreciate your own journey. This practice of self-reflection helps you cultivate gratitude, not only for the big victories, but for the small steps along the way. Even the challenges you've faced hold value, as they've taught you resilience and strength. When you take time to acknowledge your growth, you build a mindset rooted in self-compassion. You stop measuring your worth against external standards and start recognizing the unique contributions you bring to the world. Perhaps you have a quiet strength that others don't see, or a talent for offering comfort to those around you. These qualities may not always be celebrated publicly, but they are no less valuable. Just as nature doesn't compare the beauty of a mountain to that of a river, you don't need to compare your path to anyone else's. Each serves its purpose in the grand tapestry of life. The practice of mindfulness can help you stay grounded when the urge to compare arises. When you notice that familiar feeling creeping in, the sinking feeling that you're falling behind, pause and take a deep breath. Acknowledge the feeling without judgment. I see that I'm comparing myself right now. Then gently bring your attention back to the present. What are you doing in this moment that matters? What intention are you setting for yourself today? By grounding yourself in the now, you remind yourself that you have control over your current actions, regardless of what others are doing. Another powerful antidote to comparison is gratitude. When you focus on what you have instead of what you lack, your perspective shifts. You begin to see abundance where you once saw scarcity. Start by reflecting on the things you're grateful for: your health, your friends, your growth, even your struggles. Gratitude isn't about denying that you have goals or dreams. It's about appreciating where you are right now. This appreciation creates a sense of fulfillment that comparison can't take away. But gratitude isn't just about the big things. It's also about the small, everyday victories that often go unnoticed. Maybe you had the courage to speak up in a meeting, or you helped a friend through a tough time. These moments, though small, build the foundation of a fulfilling life. And when you take the time to acknowledge them, you start to see that your worth isn't determined by how you measure up to others, but by how you show up for yourself and the people around you. There's also value in celebrating the successes of others without letting them diminish your own. The Buddhist concept of mudita, or sympathetic joy, teaches us to find happiness in the joy of others. When someone achieves something, instead of feeling envy, we can celebrate their success as if it were our own. This doesn't mean ignoring your own goals or pretending you don't have ambitions. It means recognizing that another person's success doesn't take anything away from you. There is enough room in the world for everyone to thrive. Cultivating mudita allows you to see others as sources of inspiration rather than competition. When you admire someone's dedication or creativity, let it motivate you to explore your own potential. Their success can serve as a reminder that growth is possible, even if your timeline looks different. By transforming envy into inspiration, you create a positive cycle of growth, one that uplifts rather than diminishes. At the heart of Buddhist teachings is the idea of non-attachment, which applies not only to material possessions, but also to comparisons and outcomes. When you let go of the need to measure your worth by external standards, you free yourself from the constant pressure to perform. You realize that your value isn't tied to achievements or milestones, but to the essence of who you are. This realization brings peace, allowing you to move through life with greater ease and self-assurance. In the end, the path to overcoming comparison isn't about ignoring the achievements of others or pretending they don't matter. It's about recognizing that their journey is theirs and yours is yours. Each path is valid and each has its own beauty. When you let go of the need to compare, you open yourself to the joy of living authentically. You begin to trust that you are exactly where you need to be, and that your unique journey is unfolding perfectly in its own time. And in that trust, you find freedom from the doubts that once held you back. Embracing imperfection is one of the most liberating lessons you can learn, yet it's also one of the hardest. In a world that constantly pressures us to present a flawless version of ourselves, mistakes and shortcomings can feel like failures. We're taught to hide our imperfections, to smooth over the cracks in our image, and to strive for a level of perfection that doesn't truly exist. But Buddhist philosophy offers us a different lens, one that views imperfection not as a flaw, but as a source of beauty and growth. It invites us to see ourselves not as incomplete beings striving for perfection, but as whole beings with room to evolve. This idea is reflected in the Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi, which finds beauty in the imperfect, the impermanent, and the incomplete. A crack in a ceramic bowl, for example, isn't seen as a defect, but as part of its story. The crack is filled with gold in a practice called kintsugi, highlighting it rather than hiding it. Imagine applying this concept to your life, seeing your mistakes, scars, and flaws not as marks of failure, but as evidence of your resilience and humanity. Every imperfection tells a story of lessons learned, challenges overcome, and growth in progress. Often, what keeps us trapped in self-doubt is the belief that perfection is not only possible, but necessary for acceptance and success. But perfection is a mirage. No one lives without mistakes, and no one reaches a point where they are free of flaws. When you chase perfection, you set yourself up for disappointment, because the closer you get, the more you realize it's just out of reach. And in that pursuit, you miss out on the richness of life, on the growth that comes from falling and getting back up, from trying and failing, and from learning through experience. The fear of imperfection is often rooted in how we speak to ourselves. That critical inner voice judges every misstep harshly, labeling them as proof of inadequacy. But would you speak to a friend that way? If a friend came to you upset about a mistake, you wouldn't say, "You're a failure." You'd likely offer comfort, reminding them that everyone stumbles and that this one moment doesn't define them. So why not extend that same compassion to yourself? Why not speak to yourself with kindness and understanding, especially when you feel most vulnerable? Buddhist teachings encourage us to observe this inner dialogue and notice the words we choose. When you catch yourself using harsh language, "I can't do anything right," or "I always mess up," pause and reframe the thought. Instead, try, "I made a mistake and that's okay. I'm learning." Or, "This didn't go as planned, but I can try again. These small shifts in language may seem insignificant, but they have a powerful effect over time. With each act of self-kindness, you chip away at the fortress of self-doubt, replacing it with a foundation built on self-compassion. Progress isn't always linear, and that's another reason why embracing imperfection is so important. We often expect that once we set a goal or start a new habit, we'll move steadily forward. But the truth is, growth comes with setbacks. You might take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and that's perfectly normal. The key is not to let the setbacks define your journey. Instead, view them as part of the process, as opportunities to learn and adjust. When you allow yourself the freedom to stumble, you give yourself permission to grow. One way to nurture this mindset is by celebrating small victories. In our quest for big achievements, we often overlook the small, everyday successes that contribute to our progress. But these small wins are what build momentum. Maybe you showed up to the gym even though you didn't feel like it. Maybe you completed a difficult task at work, or made it through a challenging conversation with grace. These moments matter. When you take time to acknowledge them, you reinforce the belief that you're making progress, even if it doesn't always feel like it. Gratitude plays a vital role in this process. When you focus on what you have rather than what you lack, your perspective shifts. You begin to see the good in your efforts, even when they're not perfect. Gratitude isn't about ignoring your aspirations or settling for less. It's about appreciating where you are and recognizing that every step, no matter how small, brings you closer to where you want to be. By cultivating gratitude, you learn to value the journey as much as the destination. Another powerful practice is vulnerability, allowing yourself to be seen as you are, imperfections and all. It's tempting to hide your struggles, to present a polished exterior to the world. But when you're vulnerable, you invite connection. You give others permission to be imperfect too, creating an environment of authenticity and understanding. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. It takes strength to admit when you're struggling and to ask for support. And in doing so, you open yourself to growth. When you embrace vulnerability, you discover that you're not alone. Others have faced similar challenges, felt the same doubts, and struggled with their own imperfections. This shared experience is what connects us as humans. It reminds us that perfection isn't what makes us worthy of love or success. Our authenticity does. By being open about your imperfections, you foster deeper, more meaningful relationships, both with yourself and others. But embracing imperfection doesn't mean giving up on growth. It means approaching growth with patience and self-compassion. It means recognizing that mistakes are not failures, but stepping stones. Instead of striving for an unattainable ideal, focus on becoming the best version of yourself, one that embraces learning, resilience, and authenticity. Each setback becomes a lesson, each mistake a chance to grow. This mindset shifts your focus from perfection to progress, allowing you to move forward without the heavy burden of self-judgment. Mindfulness is an essential tool in this journey. When you're mindful, you observe your thoughts and emotions without attaching to them. You notice when self-doubt arises, but you don't let it spiral into a full-blown narrative about your worth. Instead, you acknowledge it and let it pass, like a cloud drifting across the sky. This practice creates space between your thoughts and your identity, reminding you that you are not defined by your imperfections. You are the one observing them, and as the observer, you have the power to respond with kindness and wisdom. Loving kindness meditation, or metta, can help reinforce this practice. As you sit in meditation, you repeat phrases like,